The crystal chandelier cast shadows across the mahogany dining table at Chateau Marmont's private dining room. Dad's 60th birthday celebration was in full swing, with 35 family members gathered around the enormous table laden with prime rib, lobster thermidor, and bottles of vintage wine that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I sat at the far end, quietly picking at my Caesar salad while conversations swirled around me about stock portfolios, real estate acquisitions and business mergers. The room buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes when successful people gather to celebrate their success. Uncle Roberto was explaining his latest pharmaceutical patent to my cousin David. Aunt Patricia was detailing her vacation home purchase in the Hamptons. Everyone seemed to be engaged in an unspoken competition to prove their worth through achievements and acquisitions. Everyone except me. "Isabella, you've been awfully quiet tonight," my stepmother Victoria announced, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she gestured with her wine glass. The conversation around us dimmed as attention focused on me. "Still working on those hobby paintings?" I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Here it comes, I thought. The annual family intervention disguised as casual concern. My brother Marcus, sitting to Dad's right in his custom Armani suit, let out a sharp laugh. "Still painting those little pictures?" he mocked, cutting into his steak with theatrical precision. "What a waste of a business degree. Harvard MBA and she's playing with finger paints like a kindergartner." I took a sip of water and smiled politely. "I enjoy it." "Enjoy it." My sister Catherine chimed in from across the table, her voice dripping with condescension. She leaned forward, her emerald necklace catching the light. "Isabella, you're 32 years old. When are you going to get a real job? Something that actually pays the bills and contributes to society?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I felt 35 pairs of eyes on me, waiting for an answer that would somehow justify my existence at this table of high achievers. Dad cleared his throat, his weathered hands folded over his considerable belly. At 60, Richard Martinez commanded respect in every room he entered. His construction empire had built half the skyscrapers in the city, and his opinion carried weight that could make or break careers. "Your sister has a point, Isabella," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "This art phase has gone on long enough. I could get you a position at Martinez Holdings. Start you in accounting, work your way up properly like everyone else in this family. Like the rest of us did," Marcus added, straightening his tie with obvious pride. "Some of us actually contribute to the family business instead of wasting time with crayons and construction paper." I nodded thoughtfully, spooning another bite of salad. Around the table, cousins and uncles murmured agreement. The consensus was clear. I was the family disappointment, the black sheep who'd somehow failed to inherit the Martinez business gene. Aunt Patricia leaned forward, her Botoxed forehead barely creasing with concern. "Sweetheart, we're just worried about your future," she said in that syrupy tone reserved for addressing children or pets. "Living in that tiny studio apartment, driving that old Honda, wearing clothes from, well, wherever you shop. It's not sustainable and frankly it's not appropriate for someone with our family name." "The Honda runs fine," I replied calmly, cutting a piece of lettuce with deliberate precision. Marcus snorted, wine nearly coming out of his nose. "Isabella, I spent more on my watch than you probably make in 6 months." He held up his wrist, displaying a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Look around this table. Everyone here is successful. Everyone except—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air like a bad smell. Victoria refilled her wine glass, the Bordeaux sloshing against crystal with the sound of money being casually spent. "It's embarrassing, really," she continued, her voice getting louder as the alcohol took effect. "When people ask what Richard's children do, I have to explain that Catherine runs the European division, Marcus heads up the tech acquisition arm, and Isabella paints. Doodles," Marcus corrected with a smirk that made my fingers tighten around my fork. "Let's call it what it is. Therapeutic finger painting for adults who can't handle real responsibility." Catherine nodded vigorously, her legal mind warming to the argument. "It's not just the money aspect, though obviously that's concerning. It's the complete lack of ambition. The refusal to engage with reality. Isabella, you have an MBA from Harvard. Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunities you're wasting?" "I'm not wasting anything," I said quietly, but my voice was drowned out by Uncle Roberto's booming laugh. "She's not wasting anything," he repeated, slapping the table hard enough to make the wine glasses jump. "That's rich. Isabella, sweetie, you're 32 years old with a degree from the best business school in the world, and you're living like a college student who never grew up." Dad leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from authority to something that might have been disappointment. "Isabella, you know I love you. But this family has a reputation to maintain. Martinez Holdings is a billion-dollar company. When you're introduced as my daughter, people expect more." The word more hit like a physical blow. I set down my fork and looked around the table at these people who shared my DNA but seemed incapable of seeing me as anything other than a failure. "I understand your concerns," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the restaurant's ambient noise. "Good," Catherine said, relief flooding her voice like water through a broken dam. "So you'll consider Dad's offer? The accounting position starts at $200,000. That's more than you've probably seen in your entire artistic career combined." $200,000 to start, Marcus emphasized, pointing his knife at me for emphasis. "With full benefits, profit sharing, and a clear advancement track. Do you know what my bonus was last year? 7 figures. 7 figures, Isabella. That's what success looks like." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed against the white tablecloth. The caller ID made my heart skip a beat. Alexander Whitmore, director of Whitmore Galleries. I stared at the name for a moment, knowing that answering this call would change everything forever. "Excuse me," I said, reaching for the phone with a hand that I hoped wasn't visibly trembling. "I should take this." Marcus rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, this should be good. Probably someone wanting to buy a finger painting for $50. Maybe we'll finally see Isabella's big break into the double digits." The table erupted in laughter. Even Dad chuckled, though he tried to hide it behind his napkin. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment and something else. Anger, pure and simple. I swiped to answer the call, my finger trembling slightly. "Hello, Alexander." "Isabella." Alexander's refined British accent carried clearly through the speaker, crisp and excited. The dining room was quiet enough that his voice echoed slightly off the walls. "Darling, I have the most extraordinary news. Are you sitting down?" I glanced around the table. Every conversation had stopped as if someone had pressed a pause button. 35 faces watched me with varying degrees of curiosity, amusement, and barely concealed condescension. "I'm at dinner, actually," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "What's going on?" "The auction just concluded at Christie's," Alexander continued, his voice building with excitement like a crescendo in a symphony. "Your piece, Fractured Light, Isabella, it sold for $847 million. The words hit the air like a bomb blast. I felt the blood drain from my face, not from shock. I'd known the piece would sell for an astronomical amount. But from the sudden realization that my carefully guarded secret was about to explode across this table like a grenade. $847 million? I repeated slowly, each word falling into the silence like stones into still water. Marcus's fork clattered to his plate with a sound like breaking glass. Catherine's wine glass froze halfway to her lips, suspended in time. Victoria's mouth fell open and Aunt Patricia made a sound like a deflating balloon. "Yes." The bidding war was absolutely fierce, Alexander gushed, completely oblivious to the fact that he was currently destroying every assumption my family had held about my life for the past decade. Rothschild went head-to-head with the Getty Foundation for nearly 3 hours. The tension in the room was palpable. It's the highest price ever paid for a work by a living female artist. Isabella Reyes is officially the most valuable contemporary artist in the world. The silence around the table was so complete that I could hear the kitchen staff clattering dishes in the distance. Dad's mouth hung open like a fish gasping for air. Victoria's complexion had gone ashen beneath her carefully applied makeup, making her look like a wax figure that was starting to melt. "Alexander," I said carefully, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife, "you're on speaker." "Oh, wonderful. Then everyone can hear the marvelous news," he said with genuine delight. "This brings your total sales this year to over $3 billion. The retrospective at MoMA is completely sold out through next spring, and the Louvre is still begging for first rights to your next series. The French are beside themselves with desire for your work." Marcus made a strangled sound that might have been an attempt at speech. Catherine set her wine glass down so hard that red liquid sloshed onto the white tablecloth like blood spatter at a crime scene. 3 billion. Aunt Patricia whispered, her voice barely audible. Did he say 3 billion? This year alone, Alexander confirmed cheerfully, his enthusiasm radiating through the phone speaker. Though of course that doesn't include the private collection sales or the licensing deals. Isabella, darling, Forbes wants to do another cover story. Something about being the youngest artist to break the billion-dollar barrier. They're calling you the Mozart of the modern art world. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the weight of revelation pressing down on me like a physical force. When I opened them, my family was staring at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings and started speaking in tongues. Alexander, can we discuss this tomorrow? I asked, though I knew it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, clawing and scratching at everything my family thought they knew about reality. Of course. I'm just so excited I can barely contain myself. The Times wants a statement, and CNN is requesting an exclusive interview for their arts and culture segment. Oh, and your agent called. Netflix approved the documentary budget. $50 million for the Isabella Reyes story, from shadows to stardom. Can you imagine? Your own documentary. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like it was made of lead instead of aluminum and glass. Around the table, my family sat frozen like figures in a museum diorama titled, "The Moment Everything Changed." I'll call you in the morning, I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. Brilliant. Oh, and Isabella? Your father must be so proud. To have raised such a talented daughter, such a groundbreaking artist. He must be absolutely bursting with pride. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. I looked directly at Dad as I responded. Yes, I said quietly. I'm sure he is. The line went dead. I set the phone down with deliberate care and looked around the table. The silence stretched on until I could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents above and the distant sound of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Dad spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella Reyes? I nodded once, a small movement that seemed to echo through the room. But your name is Isabella Martinez, Catherine said, confusion evident in her voice. Her legal mind was trying to process information that didn't fit into any category she understood. I use my mother's maiden name professionally, I explained, my voice calm despite the storm I could feel brewing in my chest. For privacy. And for distance. Marcus leaned forward, his face pale as milk. You're Isabella Reyes? The Isabella Reyes. I paint under that name, yes. Victoria's hand trembled as she reached for her wine glass, nearly knocking it over in the process. The Isabella Reyes who had that massive exhibition at the Guggenheim? The one that was all over the international news. The one that had lines around the block for months. That's me. But that woman is. Marcus pulled out his phone with hands that shook like autumn leaves, his fingers flying across the screen with desperate urgency. That woman is worth. He stopped, staring at his phone screen as if it had just shown him proof of alien life. Then he slowly turned the screen toward the table, his hand trembling so badly the image was hard to focus on. It showed a Forbes article with my photograph, the official headshot I'd taken for the magazine, where I looked polished and professional and nothing like the woman sitting at the end of this table in a simple black dress from Target. 4.2 billion, he read aloud, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Net worth, $4.2 billion. The number hung in the air like a physical presence, a golden elephant sitting in the middle of our family dinner. I watched my family process the information, their faces cycling through disbelief, shock, confusion, and something that looked remarkably like fear. This is impossible, Catherine said, shaking her head so vigorously that her earrings jingled. We would have known. We would have seen the money. We live in the same city, for God's sake. I smiled sadly, feeling years of hurt and isolation rising to the surface like oil in water. Would you have? When's the last time any of you visited my tiny studio apartment? It is tiny, Victoria insisted, her voice rising with desperate certainty. I drove by it once. Last year. It's in that awful neighborhood downtown. You drove by the building I rent for my public address, I corrected gently. For mail and interviews. For people who need to contact Isabella Reyes but whom I don't want to know where Isabella Martinez actually lives. The distinction hit them like a slap. Dad found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. Where do you live? I have several homes, I said quietly, the words feeling strange in my mouth after years of deflection. The main residence is in the hills. 12,000 square feet, 8 bedrooms, infinity pool overlooking the city. I bought it from a tech mogul for $43 million last year. Marcus made that strangled sound again like he was choking on air. The Honda, he managed to gasp. I like the Honda. It's reliable and unpretentious. I paused, watching their faces. Though I also have the Lamborghini Huracan, the Bentley Continental, the Aston Martin, and the vintage Ferrari collection. They're in the 10-car garage at the Malibu house. Aunt Patricia's face had gone completely white, making her red lipstick look like a wound. The Malibu house? Oceanfront, 6 bedrooms, private beach access. I use it for the monthly artists' retreats I fund. $22 million, but the location was worth every penny. Some of the most promising young artists in the world have gotten their start in those retreats. The conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 years was finally happening, and it felt surreal, like watching myself in a movie where someone else was playing my life. But how? Dad asked, genuine confusion mixing with something that might have been fear in his voice. How did we not know? How is this possible? Because you never asked, I said simply, the words carrying years of accumulated hurt. You saw the paint on my hands and assumed I was struggling. You saw the old car and the modest apartment address and filled in the rest of the story yourselves. You decided who I was and what my life looked like, and you never bothered to verify those assumptions. Catherine leaned forward, her legal mind starting to engage with the puzzle. The interviews, the articles. Isabella Reyes is always described as reclusive, private. No family photos, no personal information, no background details. I prefer to keep my personal life separate from my career, I said. For obvious reasons. But the money, Marcus said, still staring at his phone screen like it held the secrets of the universe. Where's all the money? What do you do with $4 billion? I considered how much to reveal. The full truth was more complicated and more damaging than they could possibly imagine. Some is invested, I began carefully. Real estate portfolios, blue-chip stocks, government bonds, international markets. Some goes to charity. I fund 12 art programs in underserved communities across the country, plus a foundation that provides supplies and studio space for emerging artists who can't afford them. I paused, watching their faces. They were processing the information like computers trying to run software they weren't designed for. And some, I continued, my voice getting quieter, has been quietly supporting this family for the past 5 years. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the world had stopped rotating. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade away, leaving us suspended in a bubble of shocked stillness. What do you mean? Dad asked slowly, each word carefully enunciated as if he was afraid of the answer. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, navigating to a folder I'd hoped never to reveal. When Catherine's firm was struggling during the Peterson lawsuit 3 years ago, when you were facing bankruptcy and potential criminal charges, who do you think provided the anonymous loan that kept you afloat? Catherine's eyes widened until I could see white all around the irises. That was a private investor from overseas. We never found out who. The lawyers said they wanted complete anonymity. When Marcus's tech startup needed emergency funding after the prototype failed, when you were facing complete financial ruin and the dissolution of your company, where do you think that mysterious venture capital came from? Marcus's face went completely pale, his expensive tan fading to a sickly yellow color. The Phoenix Fund. They said they were anonymous investors who preferred to stay in the background. They saved my company. Phoenix Fund is one of my investment vehicles, I confirmed, watching the pieces click into place in his mind. When Dad needed bridge financing for the Amsterdam office expansion, when the European banks wouldn't approve the loan and you were facing the loss of your biggest international contract. Dad's hands started shaking. The silent partner. The investor who asked for no equity, no board seat, no recognition. When Victoria's mother needed that experimental cancer treatment that insurance wouldn't cover, when you were looking at $200,000 in medical bills. Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The anonymous donation to the medical fund. The person who paid for everything. When Aunt Patricia's daughter needed help with Stanford tuition, when the financial aid fell through and you were facing the choice between bankruptcy and your daughter's education. Aunt Patricia started crying, tears running down her cheeks in black mascara streams. I continued methodically, watching my family's faces as I revealed the extent of my hidden involvement in their lives. Uncle Roberto's patent legal fees when that pharmaceutical company tried to steal his formula. Cousin David's medical school loans. The house repairs after the fire. The bail money when Marcus got arrested for that DUI. All of you, Dad whispered, his voice breaking. Every crisis, every emergency. Over the past 5 years, this family has received approximately $47 million in what you believed were anonymous gifts, loans, and investments. All from me. Victoria's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her plate with a sound like breaking dreams. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood, staining everything it touched. 47 million, she repeated, her voice hollow. $47 million. Give or take a few $100,000 for smaller gifts, I said with deliberate casualness. Christmas bonuses for your staff, college funds for the grandchildren, car repairs, medical bills, that sort of thing. Marcus was scrolling through his phone frantically, his fingers moving like he was trying to solve a puzzle that would save his life. Phoenix Fund. Phoenix Fund. Oh God. He looked up, his face ashen with realization. Phoenix Fund owns 18% of Martinez Holdings. Dad's eyes snapped to mine with the force of a whip crack. What? When the company faced that hostile takeover attempt 2 years ago, when Consolidated Construction was trying to buy you out and dissolve the company for parts, someone quietly bought up shares to prevent it. The family retained control because Phoenix Fund supported you. That was you. Dad's voice was barely audible, like he was afraid that speaking too loudly would make me disappear. The family business means everything to you, I said simply. I wasn't going to let some corporate raiders destroy what you spent 40 years building. The weight of revelation seemed to press down on the entire table like a physical force. I watched my family, people who had spent years treating me like a charity case, like a failure, like a disappointment, slowly realize that I had been the one keeping them afloat. The irony was so complete it was almost artistic. But why? Catherine asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes, making her mascara run in dark streams down her cheeks. Why help us when we've been so dismissive? So condescending? So cruel? I finished gently, though the words carried years of accumulated pain. Because you're my family. Because despite everything, despite the constant criticism and the endless judgment and the complete lack of faith in my abilities, I love you. Dad buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Isabella, how can you ever forgive us? There's nothing to forgive, I said, though the words felt like lies even as I spoke them. The years of hurt ran deeper than the Mariana Trench, and forgiveness wasn't something that could be granted with a simple sentence. But why? Victoria asked, her usual composure completely shattered, her perfect facade cracking like old paint. Why hide all this? Why let us think you were struggling? Why endure the criticism and the judgment when you could have ended it at any time? I looked around the table at these people I'd known my entire life. People who shared my DNA but seemed incapable of seeing me as anything other than a failure to be pitied or criticized. Because I wanted to see who you really were, I said quietly, the truth finally emerging after years of silence. I wanted to know if you could love me when you thought I had nothing to offer. The words hit the table like physical blows. I watched my family grapple with the implications, that they had failed a test they didn't know they were taking, that their love had been conditional on success they could understand and respect. And? Marcus asked, his voice small and broken. I considered lying, offering false comfort that would let everyone move forward without confronting the ugly truth. But this moment demanded honesty even if it was brutal. Tonight, Marcus, you called my life's work a waste of a Harvard education, I said, my voice steady despite the emotional storm raging inside me. Catherine, you called my career embarrassing and said I was refusing to engage with reality. Victoria, you said I was a disappointment to the family name and that my lifestyle was inappropriate for someone with our surname. I paused, letting the words sink in like poison into soil. You loved me when you thought I was successful in ways you could understand, and you tolerated me when you thought I was poor and struggling. But you never just loved me for who I am, for what I actually do, for the person I chose to become. Tears were flowing freely now around the table. Catherine reached across the white tablecloth toward me, her manicured hand shaking, but I didn't take it. "Isabella," Dad said, his voice breaking like glass. "Please. Tell us how to fix this. Tell us what we need to do to make this right." I stood up slowly, my napkin falling to the floor like a white flag of surrender. "I don't know if you can." "Don't say that," Victoria pleaded, her voice rising with desperation. "Please. We'll do anything. Anything." "Will you?" I asked, genuine curiosity in my voice. "Because for 5 years, you had the chance to do something very simple. You could have asked about my life instead of assuming you knew it. You could have visited my studio instead of driving by the building where you thought I lived. You could have looked at my work, really looked at it instead of dismissing it as finger painting and therapeutic doodling." I picked up my purse, a simple black leather bag that had cost more than Marcus's watch but looked like something from a department store clearance rack. "Where are you going?" Dad asked desperately, half rising from his chair. "Home," I said. "To think." "Which home?" Catherine asked quietly, the question carrying the weight of everything she'd just learned. "The one where I keep my little pictures," I replied, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "The one's worth $4 billion. As I walked toward the door, I heard Dad call out behind me, his voice cracking with desperation. "Isabella. The company, Phoenix Fund. What happens now? What happens to the shares?" I paused without turning around, my hand on the door handle. "The shares are yours. They always were. I never wanted control of Martinez Holdings." "Then what do you want?" he asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. I turned back to face the table full of people who had just learned that everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. They looked small and broken, like children who had just been told that Santa Claus was a lie. "I want a family that sees me for who I am, not what they think I should be," I said, my voice carrying across the room like a verdict. "I want people who ask about my day instead of assuming it was unproductive. I want relatives who celebrate my successes instead of being embarrassed by my career choices." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I want what I've been giving all of you for 5 years, I continued, the words coming from a place of deep hurt that I'd kept buried for too long. Love without conditions. Support without judgment. Belief without proof." I pulled out my phone and showed them the screen, Alexander's contact information still displayed from our call. "This man has been more of a family to me than any of you," I said quietly, the words falling like stones into still water. "He knows my work, celebrates my victories, supports my vision, and believes in my talent. He's never once suggested I get a real job, or called my paintings finger paintings. He's never been embarrassed by what I do or ashamed to be associated with my success." Victoria sobbed openly now, her carefully constructed image dissolving into raw grief. "Please don't leave like this. Please give us a chance to make this right." "I'm not leaving," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wasn't sure they were true. "I'm going home to decide whether I want to keep pretending we're the family I wished we were, or if I want to finally accept the family we actually are." I walked out of the private dining room and through the hotel lobby, past startled valets and confused guests who probably wondered why someone was crying in such an expensive place. My phone buzzed with texts, probably from family members desperately trying to process what had just happened. Outside, I looked at my Honda Civic parked between a Porsche Cayenne and a Mercedes S-Class. I'd bought the Honda because I genuinely liked its reliability and simplicity, but I'd kept it partly as a test. Every family gathering, someone commented on my old car, without ever asking why I chose it or whether I might have other options. As I drove through the hills toward home, I thought about the evening's revelations. The secret I'd guarded for years was out. My family knew the truth about Isabella Reyes, about the money, about the support I'd been providing, about the empire I'd built while they weren't paying attention. But they still didn't know the most important truth of all, that their love, when it came with conditions and expectations and requirements for approval, wasn't really love at all. The gates to my estate opened automatically as I approached, recognizing my car and welcoming me home. The house rose before me in the darkness, a modernist masterpiece of glass and steel with lights twinkling in every window like earthbound stars. My studio occupied the entire east wing, 3,000 square feet of north-facing windows and custom lighting where I created the little pictures, that had somehow become worth more than most people's entire lives. Inside, I poured a glass of wine, a bottle that cost more than my family's entire dinner tonight, and stood before my latest work, a piece I'd been calling Family Portrait. It showed figures around a dinner table, their faces obscured by shadows, reaching toward something in the center that remained deliberately unclear. My phone buzzed with another text from Catherine. "Please come back. We need to fix this." But for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel the need to manage my family's emotions or fix their problems or make them feel better about their own choices. They had 47 million reasons to figure out their own feelings about who I really was. I picked up my brush and added a single stroke of gold to the painting's center. A small light that might have been hope or might have been goodbye, or might have been something else entirely. Outside my windows, the city sprawled below like a canvas of lights, and I realized that for the first time in years, I felt completely free to paint my own future. Tomorrow I would decide whether that future included the people who had spent 32 years seeing only what they expected to see, or if it was time to find a family who could love the real Isabella, not the one they'd imagined, and not the one they'd just discovered but the one I'd always been. The choice finally was entirely mine. And for an artist who had spent her entire career creating beauty from pain, that freedom felt like the most valuable thing I'd ever owned.